You made it here, and I am truly glad you did. Rain moves softly through the forest tonight, steady and unhurried, like a quiet rhythm the world has chosen just for you. Inside the hidden wooden cabin, a warm fire glows with a gentle amber light, casting slow shadows that sway across the walls. The air feels calm, sheltered, safe from everything beyond these sturdy beams. The windows shimmer faintly as raindrops gather and slide, tracing delicate paths down the glass. Each drop arrives without urgency, without demand, dissolving into the peaceful hush of the night. The sound is constant, soothing, wrapping round the cabin like a protective blanket. Here, there is nothing you need to solve, nothing you need to finish, nothing waiting for your attention. The day has already done enough. This moment asks only that you rest. The fire crackles quietly, a soft, familiar murmur. Warmth settles into the room, into the chair, into your body, easing every small tension you may still be carrying. The forest outside breathes slowly, the rain whispering through leaves and branches in a language older than thought. You are not behind. You are simply here, in a place where the night holds you gently, where the rain keeps its patient song, and where rest can find you as naturally as sleep finds the quiet earth. Before we settle in, a gentle invitation for you. If you enjoy calm journeys like this, quiet places, soft nights, and stories designed to help you unwind and drift into deep rest, you are warmly welcome to subscribe. This space is here to bring you peaceful escapes whenever you need them, whether at the end of a long day or in the stillness of the night. And now, let's step inside the forest. The cabin door had already been closed for a long time. Oliver stood near the center of the room, still wearing his coat, the outer fabric slightly damp from the walk through the trees. He did not move to take it off right away. He simply stood, letting the warmth of the room reach him gradually, the way warmth always does when it means something. The fire was burning low and steady in the stone hearth across the room, not roaring, not demanding, just burning, as fires do when they have found their rhythm and see no reason to change it. The light from the flames moved slowly across the wooden floor, stretching and contracting in soft amber pulses that carried no urgency. The rain was still falling outside, pressing gently against the cabin walls with a sound that was less a sound and more a presence. Something surrounding, something patient. The trees were close enough to the cabin that their branches caught most of what fell, so only a fraction of the rain ever reached the roof directly. What arrived on the wooden shingles was soft, irregular, unhurried. A drop here, a murmur there, and then silence, and then the soft percussion again. Oliver reached for the collar of his coat and undid it slowly. The fabric was heavier than he remembered from when he had put it on earlier. He folded it over the back of the nearest chair, pressing the fabric flat with one palm before letting it rest. The chair creaked once, a single low syllable, and then was quiet. The fire shifted. A log settled deeper into the grate, and a small cluster of sparks lifted briefly before disappearing. The sound it made was familiar in the way that only the oldest sounds are familiar. Something buried in the body, not the mind, the kind of sound that does not require thought to recognize. He moved toward the window. The glass was fogged slightly at the edges, where the cold outside met the warmth of the room in a thin, soft border. Through the clearer center of the pane, he could see the trees. They were dark and still and very close. The rain moved between them in curtains that shifted and reformed. Shifted and reformed, never quite the same, and yet always recognizably the same. A branch swayed somewhere near the edge of the clearing, just once, and then became still again. The forest held everything at a distance. Oliver turned from the window and moved to the small table near the hearth. A mug sat there, ceramic, with a small dark ring on the bottom from the last time it had been used. He picked it up, turned it once in his hands, and set it back down. The sound it made against the wood of the table was solid and unhurried, a soft thud that finished itself cleanly. He pulled the chair closer to the fire. The legs made a quiet drag across the floor as he moved it, a slow wooden sigh, and then it stopped exactly where he needed it. He sat down. The cushion absorbed him gradually. The fabric was rough at the surface, but gave way beneath, and he felt himself sink into a position that asked nothing of him. His arms rested on the armrests. His feet settled flat against the floor. The fire was close enough now that he could feel it on his face and hands. Not heat in the aggressive sense, just warmth. The kind that does not push, but simply arrives and stays. He looked at the flames for a long moment. They moved in that particular way that fire always moves, which is to say that they moved with complete unpredictability and yet never once felt surprising. They leaned left, then back, then lifted slightly at the tips and fell again. The coals beneath them were a deep, steady orange, glowing without the need to flicker. They were the oldest part of the fire, the part that had already done its work and had earned the right to simply be. The rain continued outside. It moved through the trees in long, slow waves that he could almost hear organizing themselves. Certain moments the sound thickened slightly, a heavier rush through the canopy above, and then it thinned again to something barely audible, a whisper pressed close to the glass. The rhythm had no pattern, and yet it felt entirely reliable. It had been doing this for hours already, and there was no sign it intended to stop. Oliver shifted slightly in the chair. His shoulders dropped without him meaning them to. He had been holding something in them all day, something accumulated over hours of small decisions and small efforts, and now it simply released into the chair beneath him, into the wood and fabric, into the warm air of the room. The fire crackled softly, a single note, low and brief, like a word spoken in a language that required no translation. He let his head rest back against the high back of the chair. The ceiling above him was dark wood, crossed with old beams that had grown darker still with years of warmth rising toward them. He looked at the grain, the knots, the small variations in color where one plank met the next. Each line was distinct but went nowhere. They simply were what they were, quiet evidence of something that had grown slowly over a very long time. The wind moved through the forest outside, not with force, with something more like breath. It reached the cabin and passed it without stopping, sliding along the walls and continuing out into the trees on the other side. The wooden structure absorbed the sound and held it for just a moment before releasing it. It felt like the cabin itself had sighed. Oliver closed his eyes part way, not fully, just enough. The firelight pressed through his lowered lashes in long, soft blurs of amber and gold. The shapes it made were shapeless in the best way. They moved without arriving anywhere. They changed without becoming anything new. He watched them for a while without feeling the need to name what he was seeing. A log shifted in the grate. This time, no sparks lifted. The wood simply settled, finding a new position among the embers, and the sound it made was the quietest version of itself. A soft collapse. A small rearrangement. Then the fire continued as it had before, as if nothing had changed, because nothing essential had. The rain moved through a heavier moment outside. He could hear it on the roof directly now. A low and even percussion that lasted perhaps 30 seconds before drawing back into the softer sound of water in the trees. The ceiling above him absorbed none of it visually, but something in the room shifted when the rain was heavier. A deepening of the sound of shelter, a reminder of what the walls were doing simply by existing. He pulled the blanket from the arm of the chair. It was folded there, a thick wool that had absorbed the warmth of the room over the hours it had been sitting. He drew it across his lap and over his legs without standing up, simply adjusting and settling until it lay over him in a way that required no further attention. The weight of it was immediate, not heavy in the way that burdens are heavy, heavy in the way that being held is heavy. His breathing slowed. He was not trying to slow it. It simply found its own pace, the way breathing always does when the body realizes it has permission. Long and easy, easy and long. The exhale carrying nothing away, the inhale delivering nothing new, just the same warm air cycling through him gently. The fire gave another quiet sound. He did not open his eyes this time. He knew what it was. He had been hearing it for long enough now that it no longer required confirmation. The fire was there. The room was warm. The rain was outside where it belonged. Everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. The room held a particular quiet that is different from silence. Silence is the absence of sound, but the cabin held its own sounds, and they filled every corner so softly and so evenly that the overall impression was of quiet. The fire, the rain, the faint settling of the wood, the way the wind arrived and passed, all of it together became something continuous and low. Something beneath thought, something the body could rest against without effort. Oliver's hands lay open on his knees. The blanket covered them. The warmth of the fire found them anyway. There was a small sensation at his fingertips, the faintest warmth spreading slowly inward, and he noticed it the way one notices small things when all the large things have already been set down. Time moved differently here, not quickly, not in the way that time moves when something is happening. It moved the way water moves through a wide, calm river, present but without insistence, measurable but without urgency. He did not know how long he had been sitting. He did not need to. The fire was lower now, not out, not even close, but lower than it had been when he first sat down, the flames thinner at their tops, the coals deeper and more orange than before. The light they cast in the room was warmer for being less bright. The amber tone had deepened. The shadows had softened. The room felt not darker, but more settled, more finished with the part of the evening that required light and moving forward. The rain had not changed. This was its own kind of comfort. He had listened to it long enough now that any variation in its presence registered somewhere below conscious thought. A moment of heavier rain simply felt like a breath deepening. A moment of near silence simply felt like the pause at the bottom of an exhale. The rhythm was inside him now as much as outside. He let his shoulders drop a little further. There was always a little further. He had learned this many times and forgotten it equally many times, and learning it again now in this chair, with the blanket heavy over his legs and the fire low and the rain steady outside, felt like something quiet and complete. He let the chair hold the weight that his muscles had been quietly managing without his asking them to. The room breathed. This was not a thing that rooms do, technically, but in the way that places take on the quality of the long, slow hours spent inside them, this room breathed. The warmth moved. The light moved. The small sounds arrived and receded. All of it together made something that felt alive in the gentlest sense of the word. Alive the way the forest was alive outside, without drama, without demand, simply present and continuous. Oliver felt the edge of something, not sleep exactly, not yet, something before that. The place where thoughts begin to lose their edges, where one idea does not fully become the next before the first has already drifted past reach. He did not chase after them. He let them go. The fire crackled once, soft and low, a small, self-contained sound that arrived and finished entirely within itself. He heard it as one hears things from a distance, even when the distance is small, clearly, but without sharpness. The way the body registers sound when it has already begun to move toward somewhere quieter. Outside, a branch moved in the wind. He could not see it from where he sat. He only heard the small sound it made as it moved through the rain, the soft negotiation between wood and water and air. Then it stilled. The forest closed back around the sound the way water closes around a stone, completely and without effort. The warmth was even and complete. There was no part of the room that was cold. The fire had been burning long enough that the walls themselves held some of the heat, releasing it slowly and evenly. The air carried no drafts. Whatever gap existed between the world outside and this room, the cabin had learned to hold against it over many years of exactly this kind of night. Oliver did not think about the hours ahead. He did not think about the hours behind. The mind, when it is allowed to rest in a place like this, tends to find its way to the middle of things, to the part of the evening that is neither arriving nor leaving. He had been sitting long enough now that the chair felt like it had always been beneath him, the blanket like it had always been across his legs. The fire, like it had always been doing exactly what it was doing. The rain came down softly through the trees. He heard it move through the branches above the cabin, felt it in the slight change of sound on the roof. And then it drew back again to the quieter register it maintained between those fuller moments. It had been doing this for as long as he had been inside, constant, unhurried, entirely without destination. The fire gave a faint sound, not a crackle this time, something quieter than that. A soft sigh from deep within the grate, where the coals had been burning down slowly and steadily through the evening. The sound had no beginning and no end that he could identify. It simply was, and then it was finished, and the room was the same as it had been before. His breathing had found a depth it rarely reached during the day, long and even, each exhale finishing fully before the next began. His chest rose and fell without hurry. The blanket moved with it, slightly, and settled again. Moved and settled. Moved and settled. The window held its quiet frost at the edges. He could not see this from where he sat now, his head resting back, his eyes mostly closed, but he knew it was there. He had seen it earlier, the small crystalline border where the warmth of the room met the cold of the glass. Beautiful in the way small and unnecessary things are beautiful, not requiring anything of him except to have been seen. The fire held its low, reliable light. The coals were orange and steady. They had stopped their slow darkening and found a steady depth of glow that seemed to have no intention of diminishing further. The flames above them were thin now, almost transparent at the tips, but they continued to move in their particular way. Back, forward, left, up, and still again. An endless, quiet conversation with the air above them. Oliver was not thinking anymore, not in the way that thinking usually happens. Thoughts arrived occasionally, formless and slow, and passed without being followed. A sense of warmth, a vague awareness of sound, the weight of the blanket, the distant murmur of rain in the trees. These were not thoughts exactly. They were presences, simple and true and requiring nothing. The cabin held everything steady, the walls, the beams, the window with its soft glow of rain and darkness beyond, the floor with its planks worn smooth by years, the fire with its ancient, patient light, the chair, the blanket, the air warm and still and full of the kind of quiet that takes a long time to arrive. He was here, that was all. Here, in the hidden cabin in the forest, with the rain outside and the fire low and the night complete around the walls. The trees stood close and dark. The wind moved through them slowly, without hurry, carrying the rain to wherever the rain was going. Somewhere deep in the forest, something made a small sound and then was still. The fire breathed, warm and low and steady, as it had been all evening, as it would remain through the hours that lay quietly ahead. The rain pressed softly against the glass. The wind passed through the trees. The coals glowed their deep, untroubled orange, and the night continued, as it always does, without effort and without end. The fire had not gone out. This was the thought that arrived, slow and undemanding, somewhere at the edge of where thoughts happen, not a worry, not a relief exactly, simply an awareness, the way the body is aware of warmth without the mind needing to confirm it. The fire was still there. Oliver had not needed to tend to it. The cabin had held it as the cabin had held everything else through the evening, steadily and without fuss. His hands had grown still. He noticed this the way one notices the end of a sound, not as an event, but as an absence of something that had been gently present before. At some point, without deciding to, he had let his fingers relax entirely. They lay open against the blanket now, curved very slightly, the way hands look when they have stopped holding anything and are simply resting in the fact of themselves. The rain changed, not dramatically. It never did anything dramatically, but there was a moment, somewhere in the middle of the long night, when the sound of rain in the trees became something slightly different, as if the drops themselves had grown smaller or were falling from a greater height, arriving at the leaves and branches with less weight behind them. The sound spread out, became less specific, and settled into something almost indistinguishable from silence, except that it was warmer than silence and more alive. Oliver heard it and did not hear it. This was the quality of awareness that had come over him by now, present enough to receive the sounds around him, distant enough that they no longer required any processing. The rain was happening. The fire was happening. The room was warm and the chair was solid and the blanket lay over him with its familiar weight. All of this continued happening and he was inside it, and that was enough. The wood of the cabin ticked softly. Old wood does this in the cold, in the warmth, in the shift from one to the other. The beams and planks of a cabin like this one have been doing it for so long that the sounds have become part of the room itself. A small tick from the wall near the window, a faint creak from somewhere in the ceiling, brief and self-resolving, then quiet again. Then another small sound from somewhere else entirely, and quiet again. The cabin settling into the night the way everything settles when the pressure of the day lifts from it. The fire gave a last, lazy crackle. It was one of the quietest sounds it had made all evening. A single note, almost too soft to name, as if the fire were speaking in a register intended only for the innermost part of listening. He heard it from somewhere deep and unhurried. The sound arrived, completed itself, and dissolved without trace. The glow of the coals had shifted. Still orange, still warm, but a deeper shade now. Less the orange of late afternoon, and more the orange of something older and more settled. They had been burning for a long time, these coals, and they had arrived at the end of their brightness without apology. They glowed the way embers glow, which is to say, completely and without effort, without needing to be anything other than what they were. Outside, the forest breathed. This was not something Oliver would have thought to call it during the day. During the day, a forest is a collection of trees, of distances, of light through leaves and the sound of birds and the smell of earth. But at night, in rain, a forest becomes something more unified. The individual things that compose it dissolve into a single presence, close and patient and enormous and still. It breathed the way a sleeping thing breathes, deeply, slowly, without self-consciousness. The rain was part of it. The rain had always been part of it. It fell through the canopy and was absorbed by the canopy, and some of it reached the ground far below and was absorbed by the ground. And some of it ran along branches and dripped from the tips of leaves. And somewhere in the distance it gathered into small streams that moved slowly through the dark. All of this was happening outside the cabin walls, unhurried and complete, while inside the room the fire held its diminished light and the warmth held its steady ground. He was no longer thinking about the rain. He was simply inside the sound of it. The way the body is inside the sound of its own heartbeat, present without attention, held without effort. The rain continued its patient work outside, and Oliver continued his quiet rest inside. And there was a relationship between these two things that did not require naming. The blanket had grown heavier, or perhaps it was the same weight it had always been, and he had simply grown more aware of it. The way a held thing becomes more present as the body relaxes into receiving it. The wool was thick, and the warmth underneath it was his own warmth, held close and reflected back. His legs beneath the blanket were still. His feet were still. The whole lower half of him had become something like the room itself, quiet and certain and asking nothing. The chair held him completely. He had stopped being aware of its structure some time ago. The arms, the back, the cushion beneath him. It had all dissolved into a single sensation of being supported, held, rested within something solid. He did not feel grateful for the chair. He simply felt it, the way the earth feels the weight of the things that rest upon it, entirely and without comment. A faint sound moved through the trees outside, not the wind. The wind had quieted considerably in the past hour. The long, slow sighs it had been making through the branches had gradually given way to something more intermittent. A single movement here and there, felt rather than heard. What moved through the trees now was smaller than wind, an adjustment in the air pressure, a current so slight it barely disturbed the rain, but it reached the cabin and passed through the sound of it, briefly audible and then gone. The fire did not respond. It was past responding to things. It continued doing what it had been doing all evening, burning in its low and steady way, producing warmth and light and the faint soft percussion of its own existence. If it registered the small movement outside, it gave no sign. It simply continued. Oliver's breathing had found a depth that was close to the depth of sleep. The difference between the two was very small. Something in the chest. Something in the quality of the air moving through him. He was still present. He was still aware of the room, the fire, the rain. But the awareness had become soft at its edges, the way images become soft at their edges in certain kinds of light. The center of it still clear, the periphery already beginning to dissolve. He thought, without words, of nothing in particular. This was the most recent thing that could still be called thought, an orientation without object, a readiness without destination. the mind hovering in a state that is neither fully present nor yet fully absent, balanced in the particular warmth of a room that has held steady through a long evening, suspended in the sound of rain that has not ceased and will not cease, resting at the edge of something the body already knows very well and has been moving toward all this time. The coals pulsed once with a deeper shade, a breath of warmth from deep within the grate, the last of the evening's burning finding its fullest expression in a single, extended moment of orange light. Then it settled again, back into its patient glow, and the room returned to its usual tone of amber and warm shadow. The ceiling beams were barely visible now. The light from the fire had lowered far enough that the upper parts of the room had given themselves to shadow. Not darkness, exactly. Warmth does not go dark the way cold does. The shadows in this room were the color of the fire, a dark amber, a brown that was almost orange at its edges. The beams were somewhere in that, present but no longer requiring attention. The rain moved through another heavy moment. He heard it from very far away, even though it was close. A brief deepening of the sound on the roof, a slight thickening of what was already a constant presence. He heard it and let it pass through him without holding on to it. It lasted perhaps a minute and then drew back into the softer register it had been maintaining all night. The sound of many small drops, distant now, filtered through so many layers of wood and leaf and air that they arrived as texture rather than event. Oliver did not move. There was nothing to move toward. The room was everything the night required, and the room was already here, already complete. The fire was here. The warmth was here. The chair was here, and the blanket was here, and the sound of rain against the world outside was here, doing its patient and unhurried work. He was inside all of it. The wind, when it came, was a whisper, quieter now than at any point in the evening, moving through the forest with such softness that the trees barely noticed. A breath across the roof, a sound that could almost have been imagined, and then gone again, folding back into the general hush of rain and ember and old wood. The same wind he had heard hours ago, when he had first arrived, when the trees had been groaning softly and the rain had been just beginning and the cabin had still been a destination, rather than a place in which he already was. That wind had been larger then, easier to find. Now it had become what it must always have been beneath its surface, something small and old and entirely without demand. A reminder more than a presence, a note at the end of something that had been playing for a very long time. He heard it go, and then there was only the fire, the rain, the room holding steady in the dark. This is where the night lives, past the part that requires navigating, past the part that asks something of the person moving through it, in the part that simply continues, warm and unhurried and complete, the part that the body has been moving toward all day, through all its small efforts and small moments, through the weight of hours accumulated one after another toward this. The coals breathed their orange breath. The rain spoke its patient language against the trees. The cabin held everything it had been built to hold, warmth against cold, shelter against the open night, the quiet company of a fire for the person inside. The night moved gently forward, as nights do, without asking anything, without arriving anywhere, simply continuing deeply and softly, in the way that rest always continues when it has finally been allowed to find the person who needed it.